accounted for lives of over 40,000 civilians. I know it doesn't equate to the 200,000 Iraqis that were just killed, but 40,000 individualized hits on civilians were paid for, and the real number is much higher than that. And does this program go on today? Yes, it does. How is the program paid for? Will you find it under the appropriations of the United States Congress? No, but it is ongoing even today. Why does it go on? Because, friends, there is big money in this business. You see, the righteous justification is we must continue to fight communism before it reaches out and strangles us here in America, in the People's Republic of California even. And that's justification. So, if we must do this, doesn't it mean it's okay to deal in illegal narcotics? Because we don't care about people who use illegal narcotics. They're un-American. J. Edgar Hoover said it. But what's the real bottom line? How much money are we putting away in the old Swiss bank account? Because that is the real bottom line, always has been. I know a guy by the name of Dick Secord. I don't just know him, I know him well. General Secord was a hero in the Korean War. He was a fighter pilot. He helped run the covert aviation part of the Vietnam War. Dick Secord said with his very own lips, "I think I deserve the $8 million I made off the illegal Iranian arms deal for all my hard work. If you have to pay a patriot, I submit you have the wrong man. Patriots for profit should not be in America." And then Dick Secord, when he was before the Iran-Contra hearing, made the statement when he was asked, "Why were you charging the Contra an exorbitant profit in the arms that were delivered?" And he said, "Well, Senator, we're in business to make money." And the senator said, "Oh, I thought we were in business to help the Contra." And he said, "Well, couldn't we have two purposes?" Boy, patriots for profit. And so we have perpetrated this drug game. Now, in my own individual life, I left Vietnam totally disgusted. In 1969, I came here to California. I used to go to Half Moon Bay because I was an aviator, a flight instructor out of Fort Ord. I'd go over to the Nut Tree. I'd run up to Tahoe. It was a pretty good life. I was still shooting out streetlights sometime because my RPM was redlined, and the Army was trying to detune me by sending me to 77 weeks of Chinese Mandarin. 70, can you believe that? 77 weeks. When you get into 47 weeks, almost a year of nothing but Chinese every day, and they say, "You're going really good, Bo, you only got another 30 weeks. But that's how they detune a demented Vietnam veteran, that they're afraid to turn on to the Pentagon or onto society. I went to the Pentagon as an Army General Staff officer. Then I was assigned to Command Special Forces Latin America. This was 1975. My mission, as you can read in the book, right in the efficiency report, this man is responsible for unconventional warfare. Now, what does unconventional warfare mean? It means sabotage, it means guerrilla warfare, it means escape and evasion, it means direct action missions. These are the pinpointed type missions, the assassinations, the destruction of various facilities or people. And in my job as Commander of Special Forces Latin America, it came to my attention that there was a man by the name of Michael Herrera who appeared on the scene in 1975. Michael Herrera is an interesting personality because he was a Mossad agent in charge of the Wrath of God element of the Mossad. The Wrath of God element is that element that takes revenge on any who cross Israel's interest. And you'll remember the Olympics, where we had a terrible incident and terrorists in Munich, right on television, murdered some of the Olympians from Israel. Well, Michael Herrera's job was to extend the wrath of God to them, and he murdered a Moroccan in Europe who was a look-alike for one of the terrorists. But, alas, it was the wrong person. This puts pressure on the Mossad. And so they sent Michael Hariri to Mexico City, where he was made their stations chief. Now let's go back and just right in that period of time, remember what happened. Everybody here knows where they were when JFK was killed, right? If you were that old. You do, don't you? Anybody here who doesn't remember who was alive on the earth? You know the only person that couldn't remember where JFK, where he was when he was killed, was Richard Nixon. Richard Milhouse Nixon was called into the Warren Commission. They said, "Where were you, Dick?" And he said, "You know, I just can't remember." Richard Nixon was at a Pepsi-Cola directors meeting in Dallas, Texas, the day that the president was killed. Well, what else? Let's bring it forward now. What else was going on? In 1973, you might not remember this, but there was a thing called the Yom Kippur War. You do remember 1974. I know where you were in 74. You were waiting in gas lines. Am I not correct? You were waiting in gas lines in 74. This is important. A lot of people can't understand what's happening to this country. But if, as an intelligence officer, you use all information, you especially use historical fact, then you project forward what is going to happen. And that's the value in being an intelligence officer or having an intelligence officer. And so in 74, you were waiting in gas lines for a oil crisis that was not. But all part of it was this. The Yom Kippur War is the trigger. It's the tripwire. In 1973, at the ending of the Yom Kippur War, they just had another war. The Six-Day War was when? 1968, wasn't it? So they just had two wars. They said, look, enough of this. Israel must be strong enough to deter our enemies. Well, what does this mean? It means intelligence. You've got to buy up the enemy assets so that you are able to know what they're doing so you can counter move or so that you can eliminate them before it is actually done, like in the case of the president of Egypt. How do the Israel Mossad agents recruit agents? Well, I'll tell you, in America, so you can be on the watch out, in America we are taught not to recruit based on money. Surprised? Because if I say to you, I want you to be an agent for me, and I'll pay you, well, all someone else has to do is pay you more. And all of a sudden, you're their agent, and maybe even a double agent against me. We are taught and trained to recruit agents based on family ties, if we can, or religious ties, or national ties. On those three bases, how many agents would Israel be able to recruit? None, because their enemies are Islamic and there's no family tie. There's no national tie because they want a PLO solution. And there is no religious tie because they're in direct opposition. And so what is the means that Israel recruits its agents? Money. They write the biggest check. Now the Jewish people, if you think you're under hard taxation, the Jewish people pay about 60% tax. Much of it goes to national defense. The Mossad has a fairly healthy budget, but it is nowhere near the budget required to buy up their enemies. So where do they make up the slush fund? Do they do it with garage sales, with car washes and cookie bakes? No. Drugs and guns. This is where the profit is. Now, I'm trying to lead you through the wickets so that we arrive at the right place, knowing what this new world order is and seeing whether we want to be a part of it or not and what you can do about it as an individual and a nation if you don't like it. So in 1975, we now have a brainchild. In the 74, why do you think we had the big gas problem? Do you think that there was no gas? Listen, The pumps over in Saudi, I've been an advisor to Saudi Arabia. The pumps over there are automatic. Dunka, dunka, dunka. They fill up the gas tanks. When the gas tanks are filled, the pump stops. The problem was not in the gasoline. The petroleum was there. The real problem came down again. The Israeli Mossad needs money to protect Israel. And this was part of the brain trust. The whole deal was made that we suddenly said, okay, through the United Nations, you can't use single hull tankers anymore. You have to have double hull tankers. You have to have these super tankers. And the only people that control them were the people who just happened to own the oil companies and the banks. And so there was a stop. And we negotiated with the Arabs, because we're a member of OPEC, and we said, listen, if you will increase the oil price, because oil is 25 cents a barrel is 40 gallons. Oil is 25 cents a barrel at the wellhead in Saudi Arabia. Now, is oil a lot more maybe out here in the North Atlantic? Yes. It maybe is a couple of bucks to get a barrel of oil in the North Atlantic. But the oil at Saudi, which 30% of the oil comes from those Arab nations, is 25 cents a barrel. And yet what happened to oil? Oil went from like $1.40 to $32 by 1983. And the deal was this: if we will hold off the oil so we can lift the price, if you will invest the profits in selected banks. Now, Standard Oil is associated with what bank? Chase Manhattan. And so here's the deal. You're an Arab, and I am Standard Oil, Chase Manhattan. I tell you, listen, we're going to hold off delivery of any oil to drive the price up. What you do is you have to promise that you will take the profits and invest it in the American banking system. And if you'll do that, we will pay you 10% interest. Well, the Arabs say, hey, why not? Well, this is the interesting thing, because we're going to, I hope, put together some pieces of the puzzle to show you historically and factually where we're at today and why. The Arabs now give, let's say, $1 million. I take some oil, now the oil is up to $32 a barrel, and you've made $1 million. You don't get it because there's just an entry that goes from Standard Oil, $1 million, into your account in Chase Manhattan. Jimmy Carter came along, and what did he do in 1976, besides give away the Panama Canal? He, in 1976, allowed Paul Volcker from the Federal Reserve System to fractionalize banking to where for every $1 million they could lend out 60 times that much. Now do you see what's going on here? And also, and who owns the Federal Reserve? Okay, well, the bankers own the Federal Reserve. And as a matter of fact, as long as we're there, let me just name you the owners of the Federal Reserve, because who knows, maybe you'll be interested in them. There are 3 owners in the United States of the Federal Reserve: Rockefeller, Goldman Sachs, and the Lehman Brothers. There are 5 owners of the Federal Reserve overseas: the Rothschilds, Lazard Brothers, Israel Moses Schiff, Kuhn and Loeb, and the Warburgs. Those names all seem to come from a single entity. You can see why raising the price of oil so that the money would be invested in American banks, so that fractionalized banking would allow a 60-to-1 dispersal of loans, which are all interest-bearing, of course, and a lot of it goes back to protect the interest in Israel, very frankly. Now, let's get back to things that I personally know about. Hariri shows up in 1975. We follow him very closely because he is the Mossad's chief agent in Mexico City. So my job is to keep an eye on him. He has a plan Number one, Manuel Antonio Noriega wants sophisticated surveillance devices from the National Security Agency and the CIA. But we won't give it to him because the technology is forbidden for overseas. But we give it to Israel. And so Michael Herrera in '75 came in and sat down with Manuel Antonio Noriega and said, "You want these sophisticated surveillance devices? You got them." And so he gave them to Manuel Noriega. This ingratiated him, and he became very close compadres. The next thing you know, they, meaning Torrijos, because Omar Torrijos was the dictator until Herrera and the CIA helped Manuel Noriega to kill him. And then as soon as Omar was gone, Noriega was the dictator. They made Michael Herrera their ambassador from Panama to Israel. Michael Herrera is an Israeli. He's come and he now is their brother, and they say, "We love you so much, Michael, we're going to send you back as our personal emissary, as our ambassador to Israel." This is nice and cozy, is it not? Here's the real deal. Michael Herrera came in with a plan to start a cocaine cartel that would use the natural coca from Bolivia and from Colombia, and they would transport it into the United States, and the money would be laundered through the banks controlled by Manuel Noriega in Panama. And so this began. The United States Army was called upon in 1975 to provide watchtowers, as they were called. The operation was called Watchtower. There was a low-level navigation point established near Bogota, Colombia, one near Turbo, Colombia, which is on the border of Panama, and one near Albrook Army Airfield on the Pacific side of the Panama Canal Zone. About a little more than one flight a day, the flights averaged about 40 flights a month, came out of Bogota. Now, why did we need these navigational towers? Because the flights flew at night at low level so that they were underneath the radar mask. And therefore you had to have Army guys out there because they had to man the towers. And nobody knew about it, not even our Sync South, our Commander-in-Chief, Southern Command, because they were underneath the radar mask. They landed at Albrook Army Airfield. Manuel Noriega, Michael Herrera were there. The cocaine was taken off. It went through the mafioso cartel, and the money was laundered through the banks in Panama, and the Mossad got their cut, and the CIA got its cut, and Manuel Noriega, he got a little something too. Manuel right now is going through, if he hasn't already completed them, the SEPA hearings. What did Manuel say about 3 months before we sent 22,000 paratroops down to get him? He said, quote, "I have George Bush by the cojones." Why did he say that? Because George Bush was head of the CIA in 1976, when all of this was going on. And George Bush had Manuel Noriega come to Washington, D.C., and he stayed with the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence. And George Bush met with him, both in the Panama Embassy as well as at the CIA headquarters, as well as at the home of his deputy. Would you say that Manuel Noriega had George Bush? There are any cojones there? I would say he probably does. Why aren't you going to hear about it? Because what happened? Well, in 1976, my best friend, as a matter of fact, Bo Baker, was the commander of the first Watchtower mission in December of 1975. He came to me, he stayed with me. He said, "Bo, where's trouble? We are doing something very fishy here. These CIA craft coming back from Bogota are loaded with drugs, and Manuel Noriega is receiving them." He said, "I think it's a little weird." We began our investigation and determined that it was true. We were aiding and abetting a narco-terrorist organization. And so, my job, unconventional warfare. I targeted Manuel Noriega with one of my A-teams. And, interestingly enough, I didn't receive a coded message that would normally come through electronic means, but I got a visit by the Chief of Military Intelligence. I know the terms are contradictory, but that's his title. He is the Assistant Chief of Staff, United States Army for Intelligence. And his name was Harold Aaron, and he landed, he's a two-star general, and he said to me in Task Force Hawk, which is a super secret communication site in Panama, he said, "Bo, you keep your hands off of Manuel Noriega. He has," this is all quote, "he has immense value at the highest levels." Well, I'm hard-headed, if you'll recall, and I said, how could a drug smuggler and a communist, because he's a close friend of Castro, have any value to anybody? He said, "Bo, the CIA has him on the payroll, making as much as the president." Remember what I told you? You don't pay agents money. You have to give them some expenses. We were giving Manuel Noriega $200,000 a year as a retainer, not counting the literal tens and hundreds of millions that he was scraping off the top for the drugs. Well, being a good soldier, ask not why, just do or die, I did not eliminate Manuel Noriega with prejudice, but that's okay because 22,000 paratroops went down there Christmas last, if you'll remember, and in billions of dollars worth of damage and thousands of lives, they brought Manuel Noriega to justice. And he sits in Miami as a four-star general, self-appointed, and he is a courted official prisoner of war status. Remember, he declared war on the United States. Anybody declares war on the United States has got a sure thing going. Everybody, look at Japan and Germany and all the rest of them, and they're doing great. They lose the war, they win the peace. Manuel Noriega certainly lost the war, but he is there at your expense. And all of you wait to hear the revelations that will come from Manuel Noriega in his trial. Forget it. There's a thing called the CIPA. You probably never heard of it. Classified Information Procedures Act. I know all about it because they used it on me. And I knew when they brought Manuel Noriega out that he was going to be very surprised, that his lawyers were, because it's called the CIA Act and it's never used. I may have been, my lawyer found 2 other cases in file history where this CIPA had been used before they imposed it on me. And then the next guy was Ollie North, and now Manuel Noriega. So we're a very exclusive little group. The CIPA says you cannot present one word of testimony, not one witness, not one document that isn't in a closed, secret hearing gone over by the government first. You literally have a mock trial in front of the judge with no jury and no people, where the government can cross-examine you as much as they want. And then the government tells the judge what cannot be said in open court because it would prejudice national security. What is national security a synonym for? Cover-up in 1990. It sure as heck is. So do you think, because Manuel Noriega for this last couple of weeks has been going through his CIPA, do you think he's going to be able to tell his relationship with George Bush in open court? Oh, that would prejudice national security, I'm sure. So you will never hear it. But I'm telling you what the truth is, and I'm telling you why George Bush is right now fearful of some things that are going on. It's not just because of Operation Watchtower and Manuel Noriega, but there are other things in his closet. For one thing, maybe you should know, and you might know a little, but let me tell you a little more, possibly, is George Bush is a member of the Skull and Bones. Why is this important? Well, let's go back, if you will bear with me. That's the trouble with getting an intelligence officer to give you a briefing, because we use these historical facts in order to set the stage for our projections in the future. Go all the back with me to the time when we were fighting for our revolution in 1776. What else was going on while we were fighting for our revolution? Over in Europe, there was a guy named Adam Weishaupt. He created a thing called the Illuminati. The purpose was to, first of all, just overthrow Bavaria. And then it was to overthrow Europe. An act of God revealed all of this, because one of his messengers was riding with the dispatches and the plans and was struck by lightning. And the police said, "My gosh, look at this." And so they outlawed the Illuminati. That does not mean it went away. It just went underground deeper. And it's interesting because we see that in the same period of time, we had a man named Rothschild, and others will tell you about this, but very quickly, Rothschild's point of view was, if I control the currency and the credit, I don't care who controls the government, I will rule the destiny of the people. And so he sent his 5 sons to all of the major capitals of Europe, from which they created national banks, and they loaned money so that each country could fight itself and its enemies. And of course, Rothschild didn't care who won. But then America began emerging after 1776, and he saw, whoops, this is going to become the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. We must break its back, and his weapon is economics. Because if we can break the back of America economically, get them on their knees, then we don't care who rules the government. We rule the people. And so he began. Now, there was in about 1805 a guy by the name of George Wilhelm Hegel. Why is he important? You've heard of Marx, haven't you? You've heard of Hitler. Hegel was their instructor. Hegel was a professor in the University of Berlin, and if you look in your encyclopedia, you'll see George, without an E, Hegel. And he is known for Hegelism. And Marx was his student. And here was his theory. He said, only the elite can rule. All people must and can be controlled. If they are not, there is chaos. Therefore, the elite must rule. The state must always be supreme over the people. And Marx, on the left side, started what we know as communism. And on the right side, Adolf Hitler had fascism. But aren't they both Hegelism? Because the state is supreme and the people are beneath it. And it was Hegel's school that you have a thesis, you have an antithesis, so that you have a synthesis. And that, friends, is known as the New World Order. And is it a coincidence that in 1990, the great Soviet threat, the rising tide, the tentacles of communism, all of a sudden go belly up, and Mikhail Gorbachev is man of the decade? Nobel Peace Prize winner last year. How many trillions of dollars have we spent in order to hold off this hated enemy? When are we going to wake up and see what this is really all about? This guy Hegel, I don't think, has any idea the seeds he planted. Because in the minds of the people like Rothschild and others, it said, the elite are going to rule. All people can and must be controlled. We're going to do it economically. We'll set nations against themselves. They will owe huge debts to us, the bankers. In 1865, what happened? We had a major war, 1861 to 1865. President Abraham Lincoln was offered by the Rothschilds funding, a mere 20 to 30% interest. Lincoln said to stick it up your kilt. He created an economy called greenbacks. No gold, no silver, but no debt. Lincoln was killed. He said you could print $450 million. You know why this is kind of interesting? Because another guy said you could print $4.5 billion in non-interest bearing currency. Who was that? John Fitzgerald Kennedy signed an administrative directive, a presidential directive that said, I am authorizing the printing and distribution of $4.5 billion in Federal Reserve, not Federal Reserve, but federal notes, non-interest bearing.
United States notes.
Yep, specifically United States notes. The interesting point is, not only was it in the same dimensions, but they were both killed, of course, because this interacts in a wrong way with the direction the New World Order is heading. So George Bush, how does he come into it? Because in 1832, through the Illuminati and through the Hegelism schools, there was a secret society created in Berlin known as the Skull and Bones. Now, how many of you guys here went to college? How many of you in California? Because see, California's pretty radical. If you went to college in California and you were part of a fraternity, you probably had to swallow a goldfish. Maybe you swallowed an oyster and they pulled it back up, because that's the way college kids do. When you join the Skull and Bones, you are placed in a sarcophagus naked, and you are born again in the tomb. This doesn't sound very intelligent to me. 15 elitists are chosen every year to be initiated into the Skull and Bones. George Bush was initiated into the Skull and Bones in 1948. Now, this happens at Yale, and so people say, well, Bo, it's just a fraternity. How come that you don't join it until you're in your senior year? And you are knighted in your senior year, but once you graduate, you became a patriarch of the Skull and Bones. Every year you're called upon. Their one purpose is to promote each other. I'm going to have questions now in just a minute.
Just one thing, I think Senator John Kerry from...
Thank you. You TC stealing a little of my thunder here. I want to bring it up later because John Kerry, point we just made, isn't he a wonderful young man? John Kerry's a Vietnam veteran. John Kerry is starting to hold hearings about our prisoners of war. He's going to get to the bottom of it. You know what's interesting? John Kerry's a member of the Skull and Bones. I wrote John Kerry a letter yesterday. I almost didn't do it, but I know a lot about what's going on with our prisoners of war. I've been behind communist lines 10 times since '82. All the photographs you've been seeing, we've been dealing with all these agents. We know the truth behind the photographs and the agents and the prisoners of war. So I wrote a letter to John Kerry yesterday, and I said, John Kerry, I'm here to help you if you really want to get to the bottom of the prisoner of war issue. I want you to call Admiral Jerry O. Tuttle. He knows the truth. He briefed the president. He's seen the satellite photographs that show American prisoners of war in captivity. And I gave him continued lists of actual smoking gun cases. Now, in the very end, I said, I have a little concern because of a fraternity that you share with George Bush, known as the Skull and Bones. How will this affect your objectivity in this investigation? What do you think I'm going to get back from John Kerry? I put that in as the last sentence because, you see, if you even mention the Skull and Bones, they are supposed to get up instantly and walk away and leave because it is a secret society. Well, most recently, how are we even talking about George Bush here? Because it was in, and here's where I first saw it. This is not Time magazine. This is U.S. News and World Report. It's the other people. But they have a little thing here that says, read my code. And up here it says, Bush speak. I prefer to call anything George Bush says Bush lip. It is better than another four-letter word that I would prefer to use as a paratrooper and an Army Ranger, but Bush lip will suffice. I think it's a new word that could be created to mean anything that was absolutely absurd and ridiculous.